The Media Project. Imagine a vibrant region that embraces innovative technology and systems, allowing individuals and businesses to grow and thrive within the natural and cultural lifestyle of Vermont. Imagine the Black River Innovation Campus. Our community includes business and technology programming, co-working and technology tools, and other exciting experiences that are quickly creating an outsized impact to our little corner of northern New England here in Springfield, Vermont. PC Mag rates Springfield, Vermont number 8 for the best work-from-home cities in the U.S. Join us in Vermont. Begin your journey at bricvt.org.
Well, today on the Are We Here Yet podcast, we're getting political. This is the first time in a little while that we've really centered in an episode on a political phenomenon. But I'm happy to say, for those of you who have been listening for 3 or more years to the Are We Here Yet podcast, will remember a special feature we did for here and the now defunct Scots on the Rocks Politica podcast with Massachusetts advocate Travis Benson. He's back today. Travis recently had an article published in the Commonwealth Beacon entitled "Dissecting the Toxic State House Culture." Today we're focusing on the Massachusetts example of what isn't working on Beacon Hill. But this is important for all of us, regardless of the state you live in, because we're all experiencing to varying degrees some level of dysfunction in our state. But we're also going to talk about things that we need to be aware of and ways that we can combat these issues. Travis, thanks for joining us today.
Scott, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here again.
So I've read the article 5 times because after the first time reading it, this is one of these articles that you read and you go, oh, like things have been fun for Travis the last 3 years since the last time we spoke. And you and I have had some good pre-recording time to really, talk about your experiences the last couple of years. But why don't you give an overview from your perspective? We'll start there for our listeners on why you wrote the article.
Yeah, I mean, it was mainly just catharsis for everything I've had to, all the resistance I've had to work against these past 5 years with my advocacy and electoral work. But no, I wanted to put out there were like 2 main things. I wanted to put out there if I started doing advocacy work in Massachusetts, like what I would want to know before I start getting into it, so that nothing would surprise me in a bad way doing it. And I would be, I would have the knowledge to maneuver the very weird procedural things that happen every session. And I also, mainly this article was, I, for a while, would train constituents on how to lobby their state reps to ask them for things, to pass certain issues like transparency amendments, making committee votes public in Massachusetts, which is one of the few states in the country that doesn't have public committee votes. And what I saw, I kind of had this unique perspective of seeing all these different constituents and meeting with different reps in different districts and seeing all the different reactions voters would have after the meetings. And it was very fascinating. There'd be a team I would be talking to before they met their rep, and they really like their rep, and and I would just kind of be well, if they say this, that's kind of deflection. You'd want to react this way. And there was a team or two who'd be oh no, I know that rep, they would never say those things or talk that way. And then just I would see over and over again just after these meetings, like you could just see the exasperation, like everyone's faces. Like, I can't believe they interacted with me in that way. We were just asking for like these simple like votes on this, like not even like a huge bill. And so I was like, this is like a very disillusioning experience, and I really want to like make this more like public facing. Like I want more people to be able to like see, I guess, quote unquote, behind the curtain of like what it is actually like to do this work, and you kind of like just even on a vibe feeling the disingenuousness you sometimes experience with what's going on the outside and what's said on the outside versus like what actually happens on the inside, what happens on the inside.
Well, and there's this thin membrane that is only possible because the average citizen is not wholly engaged in, most people in any given state haven't been to their state house, right? And if they have, they've been for like a touristy type of tour, right? They're not involved in advocacy for a specific policy measure or piece of legislation. But once you do, and you aptly describe it in the article, you've aptly described it here in the interview, what we find more and more is that the general behavior and the things said by our elected officials that we think we know, right, when we're interacting with them often locally, or for especially for the people who only know their elected officials through the press, right, through what's published, whether that's written, TV, radio, or otherwise, is like entirely different, right? I would also add to this too, like there's a lot of times, it seems to me, and I can point to one example of this that I specifically know for sure, where you might even be, if you're able to witness, like a talking down, right? Dressing down of an elected official for let's call it a quasi-corrupt or not following the rules of whether they be parliamentary or procedural, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a dress down, and you get the distinct idea, the impression from it all that like this is all being staged for my benefit. Like none of these people are really upset with each other. They're probably going to go back to business as usual. We had a case back in the day, now not too long ago, of our local elected official getting involved inappropriately in passage of legislature in a district more than 110 miles away, right? And it turned out the reason why he was getting involved was on behalf of a developer who was local to he lived within our district. So he was a citizen of our district, and so essentially he was paying or getting his elected official to enact legislation in another district that was going to benefit this guy acquiring and developing a property that no one in that other district wanted acquired nor developed. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
There was a dressing down in the Senate of the senator involved. There was a dressing down in the House of our House member. But having witnessed the actual dressing downs in each house of the legislature, it was clear that this was just being done for the public benefit, and no one was really upset with these people. And it turned out afterwards there were no repercussions on them, right? So this is it. I'm going to guess this is the kind of behavior you're talking about.
That just what you said, I'm smiling because they reminded me of aside from the last Speaker of the House of Massachusetts, the three speakers before him were all indicted.
Yeah, well, there's that too, right?
And I think it was like last year. There was just like a picture of like all like three or four of them together. I forget what like photo op it was, but the House was, I think, starting a new session or something. But they were just all sitting there, just like they were friends and like, oh yeah, back to what we do.
I mean, listen, people know in the mafia, right? Organized crime. I mean, sometimes you do your time, but if you do your time well, there's a benefit for you coming out, right? I mean, like, how does this happen? But this is
no accountability.
No accountability, right? You speak to that, but I want you to speak specifically to that right now, right? The accountability. What is wrong? What do we need to do to fix that?
I mean, that's like the $1 million question. There are, I can speak for Massachusetts, and I can also speak for like general accountability measures. The, there's some efforts here to have accountability, just like legislative wise and like other government procedural wise. Like there's a ballot campaign the state auditor is doing right now to audit the state legislature. And there was also the Sunlight series of bills from Act on Mass to address like what's it called, like public records law and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are like good and well-intentioned initiatives. There the thing is, like, the House especially can really like do whatever it wants. There were like, I remember couple decades ago, there was a ballot initiative, or I believe it was a non-binding ballot, I forget, but it was a public referendum or something where like campaign finance law passed, and then the House just like decided to not do it.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, so you're not going to do the law, which is the one thing you're meant to do. So there's also like that level of like, it really can do whatever it wants, and you have to kind of like keep that in the back of your mind without becoming cynical and still like fighting against the powers that be. I can say what I do think is important is whenever you do actually start trying to establish a new barometer of holding powers to be accountable, you will get pushback, and like you will like get really kind of like intense. Like if you're doing advocacy work, someone might try to get you fired, get you ordered, funding or endorsements withdrawn.
Yeah. Intimidation. It's just
yeah.
flat out shaming and intimidation, really, right?
Yes.
You cite numerous examples of this, by the way, in the article, and in some cases you even name names, and you also extend it to the kind of shaming and intimidation going on between elected officials, in addition to between electeds and advocates such as yourself.
Yeah, it's I guess like the main thesis, I guess, of the article is just like the Speaker of the House controls everything, and all 160 representatives fight for individual access to the Speaker so they can get their own, like, earmarks for the districts and professional rewards. On that note, there's also those pressures trickle down even further, where as advocates, you face pressures. Whereas, like, if you ask for like too much, you will also face like threats to like not have access to the legislature and things like that. So then advocates are also kind of pressured to fight for things on an individual basis and like not really be that united as they could be. It's a really maniacal game, like top-down game, that people will sometimes even like play off like it's like partisan, but it's not. It's a very hierarchical structure. And yeah, I called out names because just like the work I've been doing for the past couple of years, like that's what I've done a lot of advocacy work, and a lot of my peers and I were just like, we would see these things happen where it was like, how is this not being publicized? Like when this rep says they're going to do this, and then they just straight out don't. And like months of work gets thrown down the drain. And it's like, okay, so what? We just like don't say anything. And that happens over and over again, every session with different orgs and different advocates. And there's a pressure to not name names because you feel that fear of like being ostracized by other advocates and like being punished by like state representatives and the Speaker themselves for like calling them out. Which is why I wrote this article under my name and not under like any organization.
I have to tell you, I admire you so much for that. We're living in a world that, where when you do something like this, a lot of your neighbors look and say, well, it's your funeral. Again, you and I have talked a lot, off air. We both share that experience of having to be the sole person, like you feel in the back of your mind, if I'm the last person to point out the shit show before this all falls into a hole, I'm falling into the hole with the rest of you. But I want to be that one person who said, we could have fixed this. Right. And really tried. You know what I'm saying? But it's a lonely sport, my friend. You know what I mean? And I admire you for that because we do need to fix this, right? And part of our conversation is about solutions. I mean, while we probably recognize it would be naive to say more participation of the average citizen alone is going to fix it, right? Because we also need that average citizen to understand procedure enough, but also they need to be on the side of the right way to govern democracy, right? The democratic process. Is that really part of our problem, Travis? That we increasingly are people that we sort of pick sides or we pick a policy and we don't really care how that gets enacted so long as it gets enacted.
Are you talking about like people in office or just people in general?
I mean, right now I'm talking about people in general, but it extends to the people in office because they represent us, supposedly. So,
Yeah.
so I'm saying that bad habits sometimes emanate or are allowed to be to fester because of us being the collective us.
I mean, we all have a responsibility to a degree of like holding electeds accountable. I try not to really blame voters and constituents more than I do people in more powerful positions who are probably living above normal living standards. Depending on the state, I guess you're in, but like,
Right.
it's hard. I mean, in general, it's just hard to pay attention to things after like working like a 40-hour a week if you're working one job and like making enough to live on it.
Because a lot of us are not. Yeah.
The Vermont Technology Alliance. The VTTA is the only statewide organization focused on Vermont's tech business sector and entrepreneurs. Our business members are Fortune 500 companies, startup founders, small business owners, and soloists. We provide advocacy, recruiting of tech talent, events, and other networking opportunities. We are the heart of the tech ecosystem in Vermont. Become a member now at vtta.org. The Vermont Technology Alliance. Tech thrives here.
And it's another thing in Massachusetts too, where it's like local news has been like dying here for years. So it's just like you can't even get just like regular news about what's going on, let alone
I'm
it's
glad you
already opaque, you know?
I'm glad you brought that up because that was a major problem for us in the second Worcester district was, not one, but like 3 or 4 newspapers being bought out by, either hedge fund giants or some other larger publisher, not from the area. And, the first thing they did was just restrict municipal and state government reporting on any number of topics, right? And so what happens is if anything would come out in the last 6 to 7 years, it's a press release from the incumbents, which helps them, not the rest of us, right? I had the privilege of running 2 campaigns for an opponent, not an incumbent, for the second Worcester district in the House and once in the Senate, and it was hard to even get. Door to door was our primary way to communicate with people. And then once we knew you, we, through digital means, we could now communicate with you. But like, mainstream press, it was made dark for all but a few times during the campaigns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really a challenge, besides the fact that what they're reporting is really just press releases from the incumbent, not journalism.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge problem itself. I do want to, I guess you said this before we started, but I do want to say, like, I think you brought this up and I'm glad you did because not a lot of people have, but like, in the article, I do mention that like, there's this misconception that, the people in power have all the power, when it's really actually us. Like, we are the ones that they're supposed to be representing, and we elect, we vote for, and a lot of this was like the potential like the potential power of the people that we have, and it's hard when it's so consolidated in the state. It's gotten just like so bad increasing over the years in Massachusetts. It does feel like kind of like hitting your head against the wall. But when you do, like, power concedes nothing without, demand. And when you do, instead of deferring to like one individual in office for crumbs, instead go publicly and unite with a bunch of people in like the same class as you, so they share the same struggles as you are much more likely to get like quicker results, as opposed to like gaslighting and problems for year after year, and the legislature telling you that they did a good job patting themselves on the back.
Talk a little bit about the end result of all of this, right? Because that was really a focal point of your article, was their power derives from us, not the other way around. This is resulting in, how would you characterize it? A lackluster legislative record over time, or just like, or legislation that's been passed but doesn't really do what it's intended to do, or do it as well?
Yeah, it's weird because it's always, as far as I've been doing this, as long as I've been doing this work, it's been pretty bad in Massachusetts. But like this session was pretty embarrassing, even for like its own standards. Normally because there's like it's hard to see what's going on. It's opaque. There's like no transparency in the procedural process. That's not redundant. Because there's not publicly recorded committee votes. It's hard to get a roll call because like so many people have to stand up for it, which is a publicly recorded floor vote. There is like usually never time to like actually vote or even like know what you're about to vote on. Just getting a bill, getting like the budget, and there being like 2 days for a representative to like understand like 800 pages and vote for it. It's and let alone like just like letting the public know like, hey, this vote's going to happen soon. Do you want to like take action on it, or do you want to say something vocally about it? It's just like,
right.
It's all very like streamlined, and it's on purpose,
Right. Well, and then you also get the people who vociferously on the floor or in committee or in the general public will be for or against something, right? But their vote doesn't reflect what they've been advocating for a while. That particularly probably affects guys like you, because you'll be working together on something for some period of time, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, they turn coat,
Yeah, there's a couple of anecdotes I could say about that. Even just like there was I don't know. I guess this is a Vermont podcast, but
no. This is actually a national podcast that's increasingly Vermont centric, but we're talking about broader things. But we're always interviewing people at some local level, regardless of where they are, and we really want to recount their local experiences, because those things often really resonate with somebody somewhere else, right? Like take out Massachusetts, insert some other state. You know what I mean?
Well, I kind of want to say this. It's not in my article, and no one's really talking about it. But it's been pretty bad here recently with like just like the Governor Healy recently limited like the amount of families in shelters. So there's like a lot of actually like direct action outside protests going on right now against that. And
to be specific, so our listeners understand, there's now a cap. You can only stay in a homeless shelter for a period of time. It has nothing to do with your personal circumstances. It's a cap.
I didn't mean to interrupt. There's actually like two. This has been a thing that's been happening for like years here.
Explain for the listeners.
So what you were describing was actually something that passed through the legislature. It was a supplemental budget. It was an emergency supplemental budget that passed, I think, sometime in like April. That limited the amount of time, I think, to 9 months for people to stay in shelters here. But it was also like a bill that was like giving funding to like shelters. So it was kind of like a disingenuous way of like, eventually people are going to be ending up on the streets. So that was like a bill that was filed in the legislature. And then after that, Healy then also did her own thing where we're just like not, it's even like more limits on shelters. Like we're not accepting families. I forget the specific with that one. There has been protests outside the State House with activists against like Healy's new declaration, and there was a state representative outside who was also kind of speaking against it. But for me, there was like this itch I had where it's like, I know that the state rep voted for that bill in April that capped shelters to 9 months. So there was, to me, it was like, that was kind of like the move that like led us to where we are right now, but you're speaking against it. And it's just like, that's like public too. You can see that. I'm not like, I don't, it's not
you can
like
see that evolution
in
interviews and TV and so forth.
Yeah, this is the same state representative too. I mentioned in my article, who it was an organization trying to get 100% renewables as an amendment on a climate bill a couple sessions ago. And this representative ended up pressuring and bullying that representative to not file the bill that this organization had been like for months getting people to like organizing other state reps to stand for roll call to get like a publicly recorded vote on it. And this representative just like pressured the other one to not file it. And it's things like that where you can only see it happen so many times year after year where you're like, this is like, there's like something systemically wrong and like unhealthy with like all this backstabbing and betrayals that go on.
The thing that really bothers me about it, besides what the activity on its face, is that in the end, it's this effective way to strike down something that's probably very popular amongst the voters, right? Mm-hmm. But doing it in a way that nobody knows what's happening until long after, until somebody like you starts to say, hey guys, this is what really happens on the floor every day.
It's not like I really don't want to give like the article I wrote too much credit. Like I also wouldn't have written this if like I wasn't lucky enough to just have found myself in the right spheres where like everyone else was also feeling the same way.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only one. Like especially this legislative session. I think the session ended last week, and since then, like there's been like at least like I think maybe like 3 Globe articles that have come out, just like all specific, like this is specifically what's wrong with the State House. This is what's specifically wrong. The amount like the media is now actually paying attention to like how bad it's gotten with the consolidation of power and like nothing getting done, and the dysfunction is actually like been increasing, which I think is a good sign. I also found out recently too, that like the legislature, I guess, is going to re-enter formal session to like get some more work done. And I got feeling that just to me feels like, wow, we actually really dropped the ball this time and we need to like save face, which I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years. I haven't seen this happen before. It's like, I almost feel embarrassed for them if they weren't, if it wasn't just like harming a bunch of people,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The in order to sort of wrap all this up, what do you want listeners to know? What's the overlying thing here that they need to take away from this? And besides, because we understand some people are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, right? Some people can't show up at the State House every time that they have an issue, right? They live 300 miles away, right? They live clear across the state. But there are things that all of us at some level can do, right? So besides more people voting, right, and being picky about who they vote for, because that in and of itself, when you're handed, limited choices, is also has limited effects. What are some of the other things, though, little things that people can do, dependent upon how much they can get involved, assuming that everybody maximizes how much they can get involved?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things people can do. I would say that always defer to fighting for the public and the power of the people, as opposed to immediately defending and jumping to someone in office who you don't want to be seen in a negative light. Because I think that alone is kind of endemic, where it's okay to say, even like a state representative that you like did this vote bad. That doesn't mean like they're a bad person. They probably are, but like it doesn't mean they're a bad person.
But focus on the policy issue. I get it. Yeah.
Focus on the policy issue, and yeah, I mean that's what I was trying to emphasize in the article, especially for advocates. I mean, for just like most people in general, there is a lot going on behind the scenes that is disingenuous, and I would just like always keep that in mind and use that frustration. Don't become cynical, to not be afraid of speaking out and against what you think is like a form of corruption, or is a form. I guess I could say this in like one quick anecdote. Here in Massachusetts, there's Progressive Mass and there's Active Mass. And I think they've both done kind of interesting projects in the past that like kind of set new barometers of accountability. Progressive Mass, they established like the Progressive Scorecard, which just tracks votes and grades people based on how they vote. It's not a lot of votes in Massachusetts, but it's like something. When they did that, they got tons of pushback and were criticized for it. Like the Progressive Caucus here hated them for it. And I don't know, like I said,
Doesn't that in and of itself tells us something?
yeah.
I don't really want everyone to know what the record of each individual legislator is in their voting. Can you not do that?
Yeah, just like being a Progressive Caucus, being mad at a group called Progressive Mass is pretty funny. But like the thing is, like that's kind of like the pushback you get for setting like new accountability measures in the short term. But in the long term, it's now just like a staple for how people, actually do track like the work of people in office. And same with the Act on Mess. They had a voters deserve to know pledge, where like now it's basically, if you want to run as a progressive in Massachusetts, you pretty much have to like sign a pledge that says, yes, I will publicize my committee votes, and like other behavioral norms. And that when that came out, that also got like tons of flack. But the flack was short term. The flack is meant to make you not want to do those things. But now that's just also another staple. So I would say, even if you are afraid, try to vocalize and, point out where you think there could be a better job being done. I know not
it really does
to,
start there, doesn't it? It's not like this magic pill. It's, like if more of us just start a conversation in the first place, that we're not afraid to anymore, because we have the faith that, more people say, if he's doing it, if she's doing it, yeah, all right, I got some time, I'm going to get involved in this too. You know what I mean? And really dig deep and figure out, first off, what our elected officials are or are not doing. And if we marry that to an understanding of what our local jurisdiction needs from its state legislature, the next part is to get real about, hitting up your elected officials, and when they don't listen, hit up their peers who do support what you want. It's about not stopping. It's a lot like entrepreneurship, isn't it? I mean, seriously, don't stop until you get what you want. If you stop, you have failed. That's your only guarantee.
Yes. And this article was basically a continuation of an article I read from like, I don't know, over a decade ago, from an ex-lobbyist who was also just like, I'm fed up with this. I'm saying it all, and that was like a go-to for me and my peers of like, oh snap. And I hope that like, I think you're right. Like, I think the thing is like, there should be more conversations like these happening. And I hope that more of this happens and people become less and less afraid to have these conversations publicly.
And what's next for you?
What a great question. I don't know, maybe write a song with my band. I'll always be yelling at people in elected positions, but as for the immediate, I'm not sure who to yell at right now, other than everyone. I mean, it's the end of the session, so I'm gonna be yelling at everyone this week and next.
Short break and then back to it.
Yes.
Travis Benson, I'm glad that you came back to the Are We Here Yet podcast, folks, and we'll link to his Commonwealth Beacon article. The article is entitled "Dissecting the Toxic State House Culture." I'm really glad that you had a chance to come here on the podcast today, and look forward to more conversation with you in the future.
I appreciate it, Scott. Thank you for having the space.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.